Okay. Thank you again for joining me tonight. It is really a pleasure to have you. I'm a certified arborist with the Tree Foundation, and let's start talking. So before we jump into Tree ID, I just want to talk briefly about this organization and why I'm proud to be here. I have worked at the Sacramento Tree Foundation for many, many years, and the spirit of our mission has not changed since the organization's founding in 1982. We want to make our communities as livable and lovable as they can be. And we know that trees can be a huge part of what makes a community great. We care for trees at every single stage of their lives, from little seeds to planting, and then as they grow taller and taller. As trees mature, we monitor them. And then at the end of their lives, after they've already given us so much, instead of going to the landfill, we take them and we mill them into lumber and slabs to be further enjoyed. From that overarching comprehensive philosophy, we run a wide variety of programs that support these goals. We work with many local neighborhoods and communities to support their needs with tree stewardship and planting. And we focus our efforts on building relationships with communities that currently have less tree canopy. One of our most well-known programs is our over 30-year partnership with SMUD, where we provide free expert advice and free shade trees to residents, businesses, and schools across the county. One of our newest goals is the reuse of urban grown wood, and our urban wood rescue yard sells milled lumber and live edge slabs for folks to build whatever we want with so that the tree's life can be extended through the use of its wood. Our education efforts, which is my primary work, range from teaching adults how to care for trees at workshops, just like tonight, to our program for elementary school kids, where about half the acorns that I collect every fall go to third graders, and they grow them into seedlings in their classrooms to learn about native oaks and our urban forests. All right, so this is why we're here. You probably already know about the Sacramento Tree Foundation if you're here at this workshop. So thanks for bearing with me there, but let's now jump into getting to know trees. So the image here is a screenshot of just a few of the trees from the Sacramento Tree Foundation's database that showcases 80 of the best trees for this region, our Shady 80. However, there are an estimated 335,000 plants that exist in the world. Over 300,000 different types of plants. With so many, humans need to name them so that we can write or talk about them or look up information on them. And we need to classify them in order to organize them and somewhat to understand them as well. Over the last few centuries, botanists have chosen to organize, classify, and group plants based on their evolutionary development. Over the years, as technology advances and we learn more about plants through their DNA, sometimes botanists will reclassify and rename plants based on their genetic relationship. I know I went to college more than a couple of decades ago because some of the plants that I learned in school have since changed names or plant families in the last couple of decades. So I would be remiss if I taught you about species classification and did not first briefly introduce you to Carl Linnaeus. Linnaeus was a Swedish biologist who formalized binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is the modern system of naming organisms for animals and for plants. He is known as the father of modern taxonomy. So back in the 18th century, there was a lot of growth in the knowledge of natural history as biologists were collecting and recording specimens from all around the world. In his book, Systema Naturae, published in the mid-1700s, Carl Linnaeus listed and organized 10,000 species known at the time. He moved from the long, unwieldy names mostly used during that period to a more concise and now familiar binomials, what we call them. A binomial is just what it sounds like, two names, which are the generic name followed by the specific epithet. For example, Homo sapiens. That is a binomial. These binomials could serve as a label to refer to the species. Also new in Systema Naturae was how the species were arranged in a simple and orderly manner. Linnaeus was the first to consistently use binomial nomenclature and really popularized it within the scientific community. Classification system commonly used today is based on the Linnaean system and has 8 levels of taxa. A taxon refers to any group of organisms classified together at a specific taxonomic level, like a family, a genus, or order, while a species is a specific rank within that hierarchy. So the taxa go from the most general to the most specific, right? So looking at this image here, starting at the top, the most basic we have domain, kingdom, phylum, though for plants, division is generally used instead of phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species at the bottom. So there's a picture here of a Venus flytrap, which is our example species today. And you see with the Venus flytrap species that it is in the domain Eukarya at the very top right there. And eukarya are the organisms whose cells have a nucleus, okay? And then further down from that, the kingdom is Plantae, and that's the plants, of course, the kingdom of plants. Next, the phylum or division, we would also call it, is Magnolia phyta, and those are the flowering plants. Below that, the class, Magnoliopsida, are the dicots, the plants with 2 embryonic leaves. Dicots and monocots are 2 basic groups of plants commonly referred to by botanists. The monocots have 1 tiny leaf emerge from their seed and grow into all of the grass-like plants, from grasses to corn, while dicots, on the other hand, have a pair of 2 tiny leaves that grow from their seed and include all the other plant species. Down is the order Caryophyales, which includes many cacti and succulents, as well as, interestingly, I learned, beets. The family Droseraceae is made up of a bunch of carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are all those which capture and digest insects or small animals as part of their diet. And that's everything from fly traps like this to pitcher plants. And lastly, the genus Dionea refers to the flytraps, of which this species is the only species still living on Earth of this type. I really like this diagram of species classification, and I chose this to show you because I think that a reverse pyramid is a really apt depiction of how classification really narrows down the numbers of species grouped together in an organized way as you move down, right? So the top is all life on Earth, and the bottom is a single species. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the terms we use to classify different plants, as that will be useful in getting to know species later. Angiosperms and gymnosperms are the 2 major groups of plants. Angiosperms, which belong to the Magnolia phyta phylum, are flowering plants, and they are the largest and most diverse group within the kingdom Plantae. With around 300,000, they represent approximately 80% of all the known green plants now living. Gymnosperms are a smaller, more ancient group and consist of plants that produce what are called naked seeds, meaning seeds that are not protected by a fruit. There are more than 1,000 species of gymnosperms still found on Earth. And most cone-bearing trees like pines and cedars are gymnosperms, as are the ancient ginkgo tree. And most of the other trees that we'll learn about are angiosperms, flowering trees. Diving down the hierarchical classification system, we get to genus near the bottom. And a genus is a group of species that have fundamental traits in common, but that differ in other lesser characteristics. So for the example I have here on the left, the Quercus genus refers to oaks in general. And then lastly, the species is defined as a natural group of trees in the same genus made up of similar individuals, right? So this is the binomial system that Linnaeus popularized, the genus plus the species. Using these two names is how we refer to an individual species, and that binomial designating the species is consistently used throughout the world. Latin is not a dead language in the world of botany. Also note here on this slide the capitalization convention that you'll see. The first letter of a genus is capitalized, like the Q in Quercus or the H in Homo. And the species is all in lowercase, always. And traditionally, the whole binomial is also italicized when it's printed. With trees, especially in the nursery trade, we also use some additional terms to describe the trees. So a variety is a subset of a species, and that has some distinct characteristics, but is still overall part of that species. So for example, I'm showing here on the left Acer rubrum drummondii. And Acer rubrum drummondii displays the general characteristics of its species Acer rubrum, but it always has 3 to 5 lobed leaves that are extra hairy over their entire lower surface. And another difference of the drummondii variety is that it tends to prefer moist, swampy sites and isn't as cold hardy as the Acer rubrum species is overall. The Acer rubrum drummondii tends to grow in the more southeast part of the United States, whereas Acer rubrum in general can be found in the southeast and all the way up north as well. So that's a variety, okay? Now a cultivar is a variety that has been selected by a plant grower for one or more outstanding characteristics and is now being cultivated, usually cloned, to preserve genetic makeup and keep producing trees with these exact desirable traits. So a simpler way to put it, a cultivar is a variety that people really liked and they made more of to sell it, right? So the example of October Glory maple, shown on the right here, is a really common cultivar, really prized for its regular bright fall color. That's one that I see for sale in nurseries all the time. So to be clear, the development of a plant species or a variety is a natural process that occurs through the evolution of over thousands of years, right? The creation of a cultivar requires human intervention and is the result of hybridizing or cloning a plant. Another example of cultivar, we don't typically think of it in this term, but that would be like a Honeycrisp apple, right? Okay, so now that we have that history and context behind us, it's time to start learning more about trees and tree parts so that we can get to know them and know how to tell them apart. One important distinction to notice on trees is their leaves and whether the live leaves persist on the tree all year round or whether all the leaves fall off the tree seasonally. So of course, it's the evergreen trees that are the ones that keep some leaves on the whole year, such as the olive tree shown here, or I have some examples here as well. A loquat leaf is thick and evergreen. It's one example, but broadleaf, right? Southern magnolia, another example, evergreen leaf. I have a fern pine, which is neither a fern nor a pine. And then something like the deodar cedar with needles, right? A bunch of different evergreen trees are common in Sacramento. Like I said, when you think evergreen, sometimes you think like Christmas tree, you know, like a cedar like this. And sometimes a lot of the evergreen trees are what we would call broadleaf evergreens, like these. Right? So the deciduous trees, however, such as the Shantung maple on the right, they drop their leaves usually in the fall season and grow new leaves again in the spring. And when you're identifying a tree in the summer, when all the leaves are still on it, and it might be trickier, you know, if all the trees have leaves, how do you know if it's deciduous or evergreen, right, in the summer? And it's helpful to remember that many evergreen leaves in this area are typically thicker and more leathery, right? So when we're talking about like the magnolia, if you can picture how that feels, really thick and leathery. The trees put a lot of resources into making this leaf so it'll last for more than just a couple months, like a lot of deciduous trees, right? So often the texture is a little clue that it might be a broadleaf evergreen versus a deciduous leaf. Another key way to distinguish leaves is how they are divided or not, right? So a simple leaf is a single undivided leaf blade, while a compound leaf, on the other hand, is a leaf divided into multiple distinct leaflets. A simple leaf may have some deep lobes or indentations, all right? Like some oak or maple leaves, right? But it is all in one piece, okay? Trees with compound leaves have many smaller leaflets, such as this Chinese pistache, all right, or the ash tree shown in the picture here on the right. The question is, how do you know if the tiny leaves that you see on a tree are leaflets or just small, simple leaves? How can you tell the difference, right? The answer is that at the base of every leaf is a small structure called a node. Every node on a tree could, in theory, grow into a branch. Okay, so let's look for a node. This example here is really easy to see. So this is a branch of an apricot tree. And you can see at the base, I'm gonna hold it up close here, at the base of every leaf, there is a node. It's a little structure right here. Can you see all of this? I know it's kind of hard on screen. I'll show you in person on Saturday. There's a little node at the base of every leaf. Nodes are only present at the base of simple leaves, and at the base of compound leaves, but not where the leaflets are attached, right? So here is that Chinese pistache, right? So this whole structure right here is one leaf, and it's got, say, like about 15 leaflets on one leaf, this one piece. And if you look closely, you can see the node at the base of that whole leaf, but no nodes at the base of each leaflet. All right, simple and compound leaves. So what is a node, right? If you're familiar with pruning rose bushes, you will probably already know about nodes. But again, each node could grow into a branch. And that's the difference right there. Another way that we describe leaves is how they're arranged on the branch. So you can see the difference of leaves in an opposite arrangement, which mirror other leaves along a stem, versus the leaves set in an alternating pattern along the stem, right? So the alternate leaves on the left there, here is my alternate leaf. So this is a trident maple, and you can see it kind of turns around the branch, but see how these grow right opposite each other, and then these grow opposite each other, and then these grow opposite each other. right? That's very typical for a maple, and that is the opposite pattern, all right? Versus an alternate pattern, here is an interior live oak, and you can see the leaves start kind of like stair steps around the side. Okay, they're not mirroring each other. Okay, so alternate and opposite. Okay. Whorled leaves, you see there on the far right, grow in the around the stem in a circular pattern. That happens as well. It's interesting to know that the alternate, I think it's interesting, that's why I'm doing this class, right? I think it's interesting that the alternate leaf arrangement is the most common for urban trees' leaves. We see that a lot more. Like the oak, for example, this apricot, all kinds of other species. The pistache have an opposite arrangement. And since that they are more common, arborists have in fact made a mnemonic device to remember the trees that have the opposite arrangement to help identify them. Because in the wintertime, for example, when there's not leaves on a tree, but you can see the little leaf spurs in either an opposite or an alternate arrangement, you can still get an idea of what that may give you a clue on what the species is, right? So the mnemonic to remember those fewer opposite growing trees is called Mad Buck, all right? And that refers to MAD being maple, ash, dogwood, and then buck being buckeye. So Mad Buck is maple, ash, dogwood, and buckeye, those four species or four groups of trees. There's many different species of maples and ashes, right? But those are the ones that you'll see in our urban forest with an oppositely arranged leaves. Right? Pretty easy to remember. One final way to describe leaf structure, which will be really useful to you in identifying trees, is the pattern of leaf venation, meaning the way the veins are laid out in the leaf. Okay, so two common venation patterns are pinnate and palmate. You'll see that a pinnate leaf, pinna being the Latin word for feather, has a longer midrib with shorter side veins. Okay. This red oak being very classic pinnate shape. Okay. A palmate leaf, coming from the word for hand, has main veins originating from the same point. This is a red maple leaf. Pinnate and palmate can refer to both a simple type of leaf or a compound leaf, right? So for example, in Sacramento, a common pinnate leaves would be a valley oak, which I set somewhere else, or this red oak that I have right here, right? That would be a simple pinnate leaf, right? Where a Chinese pistache would be a compound pinnate leaf. This is a single Chinese pistache leaf with many leaflets, but again, with a pinnate form, okay? And common palmate leaves would be the maple, right? Like this. And then a buckeye, which is what an example of what you're seeing in the bottom right there. Don't have a nice green buckeye leaf because they're not green this time of year. They're all brown and crinkly. But a California buckeye would be a compound palmate. So pretty cool. So when you're identifying a tree by the leaf, though of course that's just one tree feature to examine, right? It's helpful to know a few names of key leaf parts. So the only parts that I want you to learn tonight that I think are most useful are the margin, which is the outer edge of the leaf, okay? The petiole and the midrib. The petiole being the leaf stalk, attaching the leaf to the branch, right? So this would be the petiole of the red oak leaf right here. And the midrib being the main central vein, okay? So some ways we describe leaf margins would be a smooth margin, and that's what you would see like on a southern magnolia, right? Very smooth along the edge. We'd call that a smooth margin. Or in the drawing of the leaf shown here, or on this apricot leaf that I'll put up close here, this would be a lightly toothy margin. You can see the little the edge of the leaf there, the margin describing a slightly saw-like edge. Okay. Now the petiole, again, is that stalk attaching the leaf to the stem. And that's helpful in identifying a species sometimes because it really varies. The petiole varies in length, varies in color. You can see here it's a reddish color, which is actually where the red maple gets its name, is from the color of the red petiole. All right. And also on a cottonwood, for example, the petiole is flattened, and that's a unique characteristic of that tree, and also aspen. So, there's all different kinds of ways to describe trees and tree leaves, and sometimes getting specific about those parts is really helpful in identifying one. So let's take a step back and remember that leaves are just one way to identify a tree species. Okay. The bark, the flowers, the fruits are some other really great ways, especially depending on the season and what the tree has on it while you're examining it. So here are just some examples of the fruit types that are common on urban trees. For the fleshier fruit that fits also the culinary definition of a fruit, in addition to the botanical definition of a fruit, we have berry, and a botanical berry. Some trees that have a fruit that is technically called a berry would be a pomegranate, a strawberry tree, that being arbutus, persimmons, avocados all have a botanical berry. A drupe is a different type of fruit, and some examples of trees with a drupe would be a Chinese pistache, an olive tree, a camphor tree, and a peach, like shown here, right? A palm type of fruit is an apple, which won't surprise you if you know the root of that word, right? Also, the crabapple fruit and the Washington hawthorn all have a palm. Many urban trees, however, have a drier fruit rather than like a fleshier, fruity fruit, right? And most urban trees, again, that drier fruit, it's not edible to humans, but it is a botanical fruit that is protecting or dispersing the seeds, nonetheless, right? So one that I want to point out is the Samara. And I have a tiny bit of Samaras on this trident maple. And you can see, they are a tiny little winged seed that live in pairs. You see that? Oh, it's kind of right in front of my face. And these pairs of Samaras are really characteristic. Let's see, let's separate one out a little bit. I'm gonna hold it in front of maybe in front of my jacket, it'll be easier to see. Really characteristic of maple. So all trees in the Acer genus have a fruit like this, right? And these are the ones where if you drop them, they kind of twirl down like little helicopter wings. There's other trees that have samaras too. Elms and zelkovas also have samara fruit. However, they don't have the pair of it like you see here. It's just a single samara. And those are all dispersed by the wind. A nut, moving on, a nut is the fruit of the oak tree. You see the acorn shown there. Right, here's a nut. Also, pecans, walnuts, the hornbeam tree, those all have a nut for a fruit. The capsule um, would be found on a desert willow tree, a golden rain tree, bunch of different type of trees have a capsule. Moving down kind of clockwise to the bottom right, the akene is the fruit of the sycamore. You might also notice it looks like a dandelion, and that is related as well. But with trees, sycamore is a common tree within akene. And if you're thinking, like, wait a minute, Pam, sycamore have those balls for the fruit, and they do. It is a round cluster of akenes. So when they kind of fall apart in the fall, all little tiny seeds attached to the akene will fly out in the wind and be dispersed. Next up, the legume is a fruit that you would find on a redbud, an acacia, a catalpa, that kind of thing too, right? Um, all right, and lastly, well, there's a bunch more that we could talk about, but I wanted to just kind of give you a general um, introduction to some different types of fruits and their names, right? Let's move on. So what we were just looking at were fruits of angiosperms, which again, the angiosperms are the flowering plants. And I wanted to show you also some cool examples of types of gymnosperm fruits. However, I'm not going to say much about identifying conifers by the fruit because here in California, the best way to identify urban conifers is by their leaves. So let's talk about that. It's much easier. So conifer leaves can be described in several ways based on their form or on their grouping. Okay. And those are needle-like, scale-like, and awl-like. So let's talk about these examples. At the bottom left, you can see a Canary Island pine. That's down here, the bottom left. And the Canary Island pine has needle-like leaves in small bundles. Now, many pines have bundles of needles like this, and they can be differentiated from each other based on the length of the needles and the number of needles per bundle. Okay, so again, this is a Canary Island pine on here on the bottom left. And with this species, the needles always grow in groups of three. So we would say 3 needles per bundle. And those needles are about 8 to 10 inches long. So if you were trying to figure out a pine species and you could get a few of the leaves and look at how many needles per bundle and about how big they are, you would be able to figure out what tree it is probably growing in Sacramento. Okay. Moving up clockwise to the top left, up here, this is the incense cedar tree. It's a California native. And the incense cedar has flat sprays of scale-like leaves. So scale-like leaves are exactly what they sound like. They are tiny, overlapping pieces, kind of similar to the structure of a reptile's scales. So in addition to the incense cedar, some other plants that have scale-like leaves would be some type of junipers and some cypresses. So if you can picture what a juniper looks like up close, those would be scale-like leaves. Moving to the top right are the tiny awl-like leaves of the giant sequoia trees. So leaves shaped like tiny awls are broader at the base and taper to a fine point, and they are often a little bit sharp to the touch. Finally, in the bottom right are the clusters of short needles of the deodar cedar. I have a sample right here. The deodar cedar and the blue atlas cedar are the only common urban trees in California with this type of clustered group of short needles. So they're pretty distinct when you look at them up close. You see the groups of needles. I'm going to make this size better. You see the groups of needles on a little spur. Okay, so just we've talked about examining leaves in little small tree parts really closely to learn about them and learn their names and how we can learn to identify them. Let us not forget that there are many other identifiable characteristics that we can examine when we're trying to get to know a tree. The bark color, the texture of the bark, the fragrance of the bark, the overall height of the tree, the width of the tree, et cetera, right? Um, also, I think it can be very helpful to step back and look at the shape of the tree crown to identify it by its form. So, for example, you know a weeping willow, I bet. A weeping willow is immediately recognizable just by its shape. Without you getting too close, without looking at the leaves, right? Another one would be the really pyramidal coastal redwood, right? Or a narrow Italian cypress. You could recognize a redwood or an Italian cypress just by glancing at it, probably, right? They're very distinct just in their shape. So for me, when I'm looking at these drawings here, and I look at the oval shaped tree right here in the middle on the far left, I see a red maple, plain as day. I bet the person drawing this oval shaped tree was picturing a red maple when they drew that, right? The vase shaped tree here in the center um, looks like a perfectly typical young Zelkova tree. That's what I think it was modeled on. That's my guess, right? And the open shaped tree on the bottom left, down here in the corner, the bottom left, that open shape looks to me like the artist was drawing a Raywood ash. And I like to joke that once you master identifying trees up close based on the fruit, on the leaves, on the bark, etc., then you can graduate to what I call drive-by tree ID, where you can identify a species at a glance just based on its shape, color, and form. So after diving deep into modern and Western plant identification and classification, I want to take a step in a different direction for just a moment. I want us to remember that and appreciate that long before Carl Linnaeus formalized the system of binomial nomenclature, people knew and had relationships with the plants they lived with all over the world. Millennia before European colonizers came to this continent, the people here knew and had relationships with the land and the species in it. I learned scientific botany in school at UC Davis, where I studied urban forestry. And it's been a really important way that I have connected with trees and grown as an arborist. And I am also really enthused to learn more from other teachers as well. Robin Wall Kimmerer is, among many things, a botany professor at SUNY Syracuse and a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. Her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is a powerful blend of her knowledge. Today, I want to share a favorite passage. This passage features Nana-Bojo, who in Anishinaabe culture is the first man and a powerful spirit being. Robin Wall Kimmerer describes a conversation that she imagines between Nana-Bojo and Carl Linnaeus. Nana-Bojo walked the land, handing out names to all he met, like an Anishinaabe Linnaeus. I like to think of the two of them walking together. They stroll along discussing the names for things. They're both so enthusiastic, pointing out the beautiful leaf shapes, the incomparable flowers. Linnaeus explains his Systema Naturae, a scheme designed to show the ways in which all things are related. Beaujeu nods enthusiastically. Yes, that is also our way. We say, we are all related. He explains that there was a time when all beings spoke the same language. Linnaeus looks wistful about that. I ended up having to translate everything into Latin, he says, in binomial nomenclature. We lost any other common language long ago. Linnaeus lends Nana Beaujeu his magnifying glass so he can see tiny floral parts. Beaujeu gives Linnaeus a song so we can hear their spirits. I highly recommend checking out this book. I think if you're into trees, plants, history at all, you will find, like me, an equal number of spots to underline and be excited about. It was very, very informative read. All right. So now that you have all of this classification information and all of these tree ID terms inside you, let's talk about what you do from there when you're trying to figure out a tree. Okay. So one method is to try and figure out what family the tree is in, and then use the good old internet images that come up to see what species it might be. So a big hint in the family approach would be to look at the seeds. The seeds are the reproductive parts, right? And that's what unifies a family classification. So for example, if you see an acorn, you can probably guess that the tree is in the oak family, and you can look up oak species in your area and see if any of the pictures you find look like the tree you're looking at, right? Similarly, for the tree on the right, once you have learned, like from me today, that the winged samaras, those winged seeds you see here on the right, once you learn that those are typical of the maple tree, you can look up types of maples growing in my city and try and see if you can find a match, right? These days, of course, in addition to just looking on the internet, using plant identification apps are an incredible resource. Okay. So some of my favorite plant identification apps are the iNaturalist app, iNaturalist, and also the Picture This app. So iNaturalist and Picture This, and I will put both of those into the chat for you in a minute if you want to check them out. Those apps are easy to use. You can just download them onto your phone, take a picture of a leaf, and boom, it will suggest what the plant is, right? I do say it will suggest what the plant is because apps aren't perfect. They are not trained botanists. However, with the knowledge that you have and what you've gained tonight, those suggestions, you can use your knowledge to evaluate what the app is suggesting and judge if the suggested species is correct in order to determine what you're really looking at. So as we wrap up this class tonight, before we do, I want to introduce you to the dichotomous key. So one of the reasons that this class on identification focuses on learning all of the tree parts so much, and all those terms that we talked about today, that's so that you can use a dichotomous key to figure out step by step what tree you have. All right. So a dichotomous key is a series of two choices about the feature. For example, are the leaves opposite or alternately arranged? Are the leaves coniferous or broadleaf? There is only one answer for every step. It's black or white. And then that answer that you choose leads you to the next question, all the way down until you have narrowed it down to the species. So keys are really easy to use with just a little bit of practice, and it's really fun, like solving a puzzle. In the example here, the first question is the tree coniferous or is the tree broadleaf? So if you have a tree in front of you and you're trying to figure out what it is, right? You would look at the key and it would say, is the tree coniferous or is the tree broadleaf? That's question one. And you would select the answer and it would direct you to move on to the next one. So in this case, let's say its leaves are the lobe leaves. Let's say it's this plant down here on the bottom that we're peeing out, okay? So for the first question, you would select the tree is broadleaf, and the key directs you to go to question two. At question two, it asks, are the leaves simple or are the leaves compound? And in this case, looking here, we can see that the leaves are simple. So within that answer, the key directs you to go to question three. At question three, the key asks, are the leaves simple leaves or alternate? Oh, I'm sorry, are the leaves opposite or alternate? And you're looking at the leaves on the branch and you see that they are alternately arranged on the branch. So with that, the key directs you further on and on and on until you have worked out all the options and you get to the bottom of the key and it tells you that this is a post oak. Ta-da! So like, okay, that sounds great, Pam. I want to try out a key, right? Where do you find one? Well, the Arbor Day Foundation website has a good key resource that I like. And there are also a variety of tree identification books that have keys included in them. And I'll include a link to the Arbor Day site and some other resources at the end. So another book that I want to introduce you to is called A Californian's Guide to the Trees Among Us by Matt Ritter. This is my favorite guidebook for urban trees on the West Coast by far, because most other tree guidebooks published, I have many, they are focused either on native species in Western forests, useful, but again, not helpful for an urban forest, or on urban trees in eastern cities, right? This book, on the other hand, has all the trees that you'll find in temperate, diverse Californian cities. So in addition to pages with lots of color photos of the species and descriptions, it also has a dichotomous key, actually a series of them. So you can go through step-by-step options and figure out what tree species you have. I also want to be clear that even though it has botanical keys and other technical tree information, it's also a very, very approachable and fun thing to read. Like I said, there's a lot of color photographs and even little anecdotes and quotes in there, and all, kind of interspersed throughout that. It is not a book just for arborists. It's for everyone. It's so highly regarded, in fact, that we made it a part of our upcoming tree tour. So if you haven't already heard, this Saturday afternoon, November 16th, I will be leading a tour of the trees of Southside Park here in Sacramento. And the $25 fee for the tour gets you not only the tour itself, filled with knowledge and enthusiasm from me, but also a copy of this book to take home yourself. You can check out our events page if you'd like to register. What happened there? Okay. And that is the conclusion of our program. So much. So if you haven't already, again, please enter your full name in the chat so I can track the attendance tonight. It's very helpful. Here,